Welcome to the CVC Insider series, where we interview practitioners of corporate venturing. Today, I am so excited to have Ornit Shinar from Citi. Ornit, welcome. Do you mind maybe sharing 5 minutes about your journey? How did you get into corporate venturing?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. So I started out in a very atypical way, I want to say, but you'll keep me honest on that, and you'll tell me I met 7 people like you before. So I started out studying law. I then worked for the president of the Israeli Supreme Court, and then I worked for the Antitrust Authority and an NGO fighting corruption in politics. So all things that really make it very obvious that I have nothing to do with this space. Mm-hmm. But then high tech was just getting started in Israel, and there was a lot of buzz around it. And someone told me, you speak 7 languages, you've traveled the world, you've lived in so many countries, you should go work in high tech. And I went and interviewed for a job in a small startup. It was like 25, 30 people in a little village where we were sitting in a chicken coop that they had converted into a startup. And
wow.
It was very entertaining, yes. And they said, well, what would you like to do? Would you like to come do sales or marketing? And I said, well, what's the difference? They said, oh, go to sales, come, you can join us now. And for a while, I kept wondering, why did they take this risk? Why did they bet on me? And then like 4 or 5 months later, they IPO'd, and I saw that it said that they spoke 8 languages. 7 were mine. And that was my claim to fame and my way into the tech world. And 3 years after that, I was involved in the founding of a startup. And after that, I invested in a startup. And then I founded another startup of my own. And I had a few successes. Some of these things, became, exited and became quite successful. So the next company I founded was a company in which I thought I would help startups do everything that I know, right? So everything other than coding, sales, marketing, business development, fundraising, strategy, management, you name it. My first client was Sony Electronics. Lightspeed Ventures was the second, and Citi was the third. And in each one of those, I got to work with startups, still doing everything that I thought I would do, but from the other side, from the large enterprise or the investor side, rather than from the startup side. And at some point, Citi had taken me to set up a cooperation program with startups. And I did it for a couple of years, set it up, ran it, showed them it was working. And then I said, okay, what's next? And they said, what do you mean, what's next? This is what you're doing. I said, at Sony, I'd done a few investments. I really like that. Let's do investments. And they said, sure, let's figure it out. And by then I knew Citi, I knew how it worked. And I saw, that it would take a while till they would get the approvals for this role. And I was offered a role at Lenovo to head their external innovation practice in EMEA. Ended up doing lots of investment for them, really enjoyed that. And 3.5 years later, Citi said to me, we got the authorization, can you come run the investments for us now? And so I went back to Citi in 2017, and I've been running the investments in Israel since then. And as of a year ago, I also head the external innovation practice for the innovation labs globally. So I have a lot of visibility into startups and how they apply to Citi around the globe. And it gives me a lot of opportunities and, access to a lot of startups that could be relevant for investments as a result of that. So I have a 10-person team today scouring the world looking for innovation that is applicable to us.
Wow. So you have nearly as many hats in Citi as you speak languages.
Well, half.
So let's start from the very beginning, but I want to talk about the many hats afterwards. How do you find and first I can say, no one has your background. That's very clear. Tell me about law and how much of that was formative in you becoming great at sourcing innovations, identifying them, assessing them, becoming a great investor.
So that's a great question. I think there's many things in law that were very, very helpful. The first thing that you learn when you're a lawyer is to be very structured in your thinking, in your understanding of what people are looking for. And if you're a good litigator, which not everyone goes for litigation, but if you're a good litigator, then you also understand how to ask the right questions, how to get to the right answers, and how to set them up in such a manner that you get to the results that you want. So if you think of a CVC, we have numerous roles, right? Part of it is understanding what's strategic for our organization. So if you work in a little shop like Citi, well, there's many, many different stakeholders in many, many different areas that are completely different. And you need to be able to understand what each one of those entities is looking for, and what will be strategic for them. So law builds you up in a manner that you can understand, many different stakeholders, many different clients, many different cases. And in that sense, it's very helpful. The next part is that you find something that you want to do. You find a startup that you want to invest in. If you're lucky and it's your own decision, great. But in most CVCs, you have to now convince stakeholders, whoever they may be, whether they're other co-investors, your bosses, or whether they're the business that needs to now agree to engage with that. Well, who better than a litigator to develop a case on why this is the right one and how to go about doing it? And if you've done corporate law, then you know how to also set up term sheets and investments, etc. You understand the structure, the legalese, the negotiation, what is something that you need to fight for, and what is just, lawyers doing lawyerly thing. And you can tell them, listen, that one, leave me alone. It's not that important. We can do without it. Yeah. And the ability to talk their language and understand what they're doing. And, in the end, what we do is risk mitigation, right? Not investing in innovation is risky for the organization. And then when you are investing in it, you've got to be smart about the types of risks that you're taking and how you manage those risks. So all of that, I think, are skill sets that you learn in a very meaningful way as a lawyer. And maybe the most important lesson for me, one of the things I hated the most in law, and probably the number one reason I left the profession, was that in law, I don't win unless you lost. But when you go to high tech and you start working in high tech, it's such a refreshing breath of fresh air where I can win because you won and not because I got you on your knees. Yep. That's something that for me was, I never looked back. I never, ever wanted to go back to law because this win-win thing is just, at the very core of what I always try to achieve.
Well, I love everything you've said. Let me double click on whether you have tips you can share to the CVCs who are listening about how to convince stakeholders, because that is a recurring theme across CVCs, which is I find it very hard to convince business groups, business units, my management, different stakeholders. Do you have tips from your litigation and from your CVC experience that you find not used a lot, but actually really makes a difference?
So I think one of our main faults is that we try to sell more than we try to listen. And if you actually listen to what your stakeholder is saying and what they need, then you could tweak your answer to actually fulfill everything they want and they need. So you have to be smart about setting the scene in such a manner that you hear what they are telling you their pain point is and not what you think it is. And then really set up your entire thesis on how it provides them that part, that element that they're looking for, versus who cares that you think this is innovative or smart or that you have a lot of conviction. What you really need to sell is that they have a lot of conviction. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. Okay, thank you. Another part of your journey is being a serial entrepreneur, whether joining a startup, creating your own startup. Can you share the few things that when you're looking at an investment today, you are taking from what you've learned as an entrepreneur?
So I think there's a variety of things within it. I'm a firm believer in the good of people, right? So I will automatically believe that what you tell me is the truth, that it's, well thought out, etc., etc. And I will give you the benefit of the doubt on pretty much everything you will say. This is about 180 degrees from many of my colleagues, specifically in our space, because we are taught to be cynical and question everything that we're told. But I actually approach it in reverse. I my first meeting with you, I will give you the benefit of the doubt on absolutely everything. I will listen, I will absorb, I will enjoy the excitement that I hear in you. And when I look at it like that, I have an opportunity to fall in love a little bit with the idea. I then go back to exactly the same place as everyone else and start checking it and questioning it and verifying it. But that moment, I think, in the beginning, where you are willing to absorb everything and you're willing to hear everything, and when your entrepreneur tells you, I am different from the others because whatever it is their excuse is in that moment, and you're not busy constantly looking for the holes, you can see the entirety, the whole with a W rather than just the holes with the H, right?
Yeah.
I think that's something that's super important, because it's what enables you to get conviction around something that you're doing. And when you do that, it also allows you to think about it in a more holistic manner that will allow you to think of where it could apply as it is, or with some tweaks to what your organization is actually looking for. So for me, I think that's one of the key things when you're actually going about things, is to first let it, flow over you, and then only start, digging into it and checking what's wrong with the story.
I like it. It nearly feels like you're giving yourself permission to dream or to share the dream of the entrepreneur you're meeting.
I think so, because what I see, if you're a good salesperson, you'll succeed in whatever you do. And so you've got good entrepreneurs that will be good salespeople. You've got good entrepreneurs that maybe haven't finished, figuring out their story all the way to the end. But if you're constantly interrupting or digging holes or thinking about everything else, you're not listening to what they're saying. And I think in the end, when you're looking to invest in a good entrepreneur, you want someone that has the passion, that has the vision, maybe has the humility to know that they don't have all the answers yet, and that some of the answers they currently have will change with time. But that's okay, because it will always be like that for every entrepreneur, if you think about it. So it's less about do they have all the answers, and more about do they have what it takes to find all the right answers as they go about doing it. And I think, if you listen to them, then you can try and figure out where they're at on this on this route, and whether they have what it takes. Of course, the later the startup, the less it's about that, and the more you want to see that they've actually gotten the answers, right?
Yeah. But you do look at early stage investments.
So we look across the board. We invest, we say we're stage agnostic. The reality is that we don't do seed very often, but we have done some. And we go all the way to pre-IPO companies.
I see. And do you approach this open-mindedness the same way if it's early stage versus late stage?
I would say yes. I always like to come, to give them the opportunity to tell the story, and only then to start digging, right? Because it's the same thing. If you go into the late stage company, in theory, you could go into a late stage company, look at their books, look at their growth numbers and their SaaS metrics, never meet the founder and say, this is a good investment or this is a bad investment. On paper, it's true. In reality, very few of us would have, and I know Google's tried to do some, AI types of investments, but I think the vast majority of us also want to see something behind it and actually try and get a feel for the person with whom they're going to be dealing. For so many reasons, right? First and foremost, you're going to be sitting at the table with this person for the next 5 to 10 years.
Big commitment.
You'd better enjoy sitting with that person. You better believe what you hear coming out of that person's mouth. You better be willing to have your name associated to what that person's going to be doing. And so while it's critical to analyze all the numbers and make sure it's a fast-growing, valid business model, etc., you really need to also get comfortable with the founder and know that you like what they're doing and you believe in what they're doing, and you're willing to be associated with them. It's like a mini marriage if you think about it.
Yep, it really is. You're making a real commitment and you join the same journey. Now, back to your serial entrepreneur background. How about when you raised funds and you met with VCs and CVCs? Did you have these moments of, if I ever become a VC, I will never do that? Or if I become a VC, I want to do the same thing?
So definitely on the first part, there was a VC that I spoke to, and every meeting I would get the same result in the end. They would say, we really like what you're doing. It would be great if you could just create this tiny little document for me. And they would send me on this massive journey of creating pages and pages of work for them. And after the third or the fourth or the fifth time that they do that and they still haven't moved and they still haven't invested, you get pretty frustrated. And at some point I told my partner, listen, not doing it. They're not going to invest. It's busy work. We have better work to do that will actually either raise money or bring clients, but this is busy work. And for me, one of my first conclusions was that I will never, ever ask someone to create something for me unless I have real conviction in the fact, and I may not be able to get the approvals, but I'm working towards it. And while I'm making them work, I'm, side by side, shoulder by shoulder, working towards getting the investment through as well. And if not, I'm not going to ask them to create anything for me that's different from what they already have.
Actually, I think the best feedback we receive from entrepreneurs, and you probably have the same feedback, is when our due diligence brings questions they did not think about, and that helps them to build their strategy. And that's not busy work, that's useful work at that point.
That's fair. And again, if they're doing this because they're trying to understand what you're doing and they're trying to get conviction around the opportunity, then by all means, this is great. It's when it's, some form of curiosity.
Yeah.
Oh, wouldn't it be great if we could? Or I'm trying to learn this space. I'll ask questions about the space. That's just not fair to the entrepreneurs.
It's totally unfair. If anything, it's getting entrepreneurs who have so many scarce resources, so few and scarce resources, to do work for you, for your own purpose, and not even with an intent to invest. Yeah.
So for me, that was my biggest, I wouldn't do. My biggest would do. There's one VC that decided he really liked us and decided to take us under his wing. And he brought us to his investment committee, and the investment committee said no, which is fine. It happens.
Yep.
I think 60-70% of the other investors that came into the company, he brought them to us. And that's pretty amazing, right? It's someone who really helped us and really put his, his heart on his sleeve and walked a mile in our shoes. And someone that I'm in touch with to this day, of course, and very, very appreciative of my lessons, the lessons that he taught me, of really treating each entrepreneur with a lot of honor and respect and trying to do good. And we spoke earlier in another context, you and I, but I think trying to spread a good word or a good deed around, good karma, that's good karma. Really something that I believe in very much.
Yep. Good karma, paying forward, it makes sense, but in the CVC world or VC world, it makes even more sense.
Completely. And it's not always something that, if I do something for you, that you will be the one that will pay it back. Yep. And that's fine. But if you're known in the industry as someone that does good around you, you'll find out, I think, very quickly that people also want to do good by you.
And in this case, if you have a chance to invest with him, you will. You know that he means well and he intends to follow through.
Exactly.
Let's move to Sony. What is the biggest learning you had at Sony that you use today?
So it's a funny one. How they have these, I'm trying to think of the polite way to say it, but it's the fuck up nights, right? Where they bring people to talk about what they did that didn't go well. So I have a good one in that level. I was meeting startups in a variety of areas, and I was mainly doing semiconductor and hardcore deep tech. And the startup turns to me and says, "Hey, we've got something we'd really like you to help us present it to Sony." And it was some hotel software or other, like an ERP for hotels. And I look at them and I said, "What are you bothering me with this for? And how is that even related to Sony?"
Yeah.
And the entrepreneur, very shocked, says to me, "You don't know that Sony's the biggest player in this space?" No, I didn't know. The lesson learned is that when you work for a really large corporation, you know what you know, but there's so much that you don't know. There's so many areas that someone is involved with, or it's a space that the organization is working in, and you just simply don't know. So whenever someone comes to me now with these things, I try to be a little more humble and not jump to conclusions and say, why are you in the same situation? So why are you reaching out? Who do you think at Sony would be interested in it? And then I could have gotten to the same answer where they would have educated me without getting slapped, in such a manner.
Yeah.
So, and it's back to learning to listen and not to jumping to conclusions, right?
And being humble. Assume you don't know. Yeah.
And more often than not, you'll be right.
Very nice. How about Lightspeed?
So in Lightspeed, I was doing a slightly different role. They were looking for help to attract the right entrepreneurs so that they could get more deal flow and more relevant deal flow. So I was working with them on trying to organize marketing events and knowledge sharing events that would bring them the right type of startups to the table. It was very interesting because I'd done work for Citi and for Sony at the time. And so seeing the world from the Lightspeed perspective and trying to understand their wants and needs. And by the way, their criteria, right? And suddenly you discover that we're not all the same and we're not looking for the exact same things. They had a very specific target company. They were looking for early stage companies, but within very specific parameters. And it was intellectually super interesting to see their process and learn and to try and create opportunities for them that would put them on stage in front of the right groups. And so it was very educational, if you will.
And so what is one learning that you still use today?
I think what I liked was the intellectual rigor that they brought to the table in choosing who the right player would be or who the right category of players would be. So for instance, if you're only going to look at entrepreneurs with a specific background or a specific experience, etc., then you're targeting those and you're not looking to the left or to the right. And you know that you're going to miss opportunities in those other areas, but you're perfectly okay with it because you've decided what your target market is right now and what you're looking for in a very specific manner. And most of us, have some form of FOMO, right? We will not want to miss opportunities that fall outside the very strict parameters that we have, and we'll see that our borders tend to, get diluted with time as we expand it to not miss out on anything. But FOMO might be our worst enemy in many cases, because if we are super focused, we can keep the investment bar super, super high and not compromise just because of a less focused manner of investigating what we're actually looking for.
Let me go a little deeper, because FOMO is fear of missing out. And fear, is there any time you think fear is actually helpful for investment?
Sure, when I try to convince my stakeholders. If you think about it, that's the exact same thing. FOMO is your worst enemy when it's targeting you, but if you can use it to target the other side, now it's your best friend. But even more than that, right? I think fear keeps us on our toes, makes us ask the right questions in our due diligence, makes us question what we're seeing. So as I said, the first go round, I want to listen naively at the story that I'm being told, hear it, absorb it, get a nice feel for it. The second go round, I want to come at it with a lot of questions. Now, if you have the right element of fear, then you can, because you don't want to make a bad investment and you don't want to bring something that isn't relevant, or you don't want to invest with someone who's not reliable. There's so many things that you need to verify. And if you are using fear as a tool to make sure that you stay on your toes and you don't take things for granted, then it keeps you a lot more sharp and not complacent in what you're doing.
Yep.
Well, fear is, a double-edged sword. If it paralyzes you, it's horrible. But if it keeps you on your toes and sharp, it's fantastic.
I like your nuanced answer. Very nice. Now, let's move higher level, talking about external innovation. First, could you describe why you think companies need to look at external innovation?
So first of all, because otherwise I'll be out of a job. But let's be serious for a second. Every company can recruit the smartest people ever and put them on their payroll and do whatever it is they're doing. And that's great. And they're going to develop amazing things. And, all large companies do that. Let's be realistic. I'm sure that yours, mine, my previous ones, they all have very, very smart people on their payroll. But they only look at what they look at. And they only see and do and live within the parameters of what they're allowed to live within. And the guardrails that are set within those parameters and the prescriptive capabilities of the organization within that. And it's true for you, it's true for me as well. It's not just, those others, the powers that be that aren't us, right? It's true for us as well that we get accustomed to our boundaries and our rules and regulations, and we stop looking. The first time you look at it, you get smacked. The second time you look at it, you get smacked. You're not looking at it the third time. You got your lesson, you understood it, and you become bound to certain borders. Yeah. Now, if you start looking outside those borders, then those people outside, it's not that they're outside the box. They don't even know the box exists. And so they're doing whatever it is they want. They're inventing new things. They're thinking about paradigm shifts from the norm of what currently exists. And sometimes not even because they're that original, sometimes simply because they don't even know what the norm is. So they're inventing things in the manner that they think is just the right way of doing things.
No filters.
Yeah. And so if you ignore everything that's happening outside, by definition, you will be missing out on all of those things, all of the new technologies that you haven't been allowed to experiment with, all of the manners of thinking that aren't the way we think about it. And for me, in large corporations, you often see that, we will recruit people of different genders and origins, etc. But groupthink takes over at some point within large organizations because we have similar educations, because we've been beaten over our head in the same way, because we've been, groomed to speak in a certain manner, to act in a certain manner, and because we've worked a process, 20 times the same way, right? So I really do think it's critical to bring diversity to the table in a meaningful way, and not just as an outwardly appearance, but rather as a core differentiation, a core distinction. And the only way to do that is to bring outsiders.
Very nice. And so the next question is, why is it so hard to bring it in?
For so many reasons. Let's start with the first one, right? You bring something in and someone will immediately say, well, I could develop that in 5 minutes on the corner of my desk. Why do we need an outside company to do that? So that's hard, because sometimes you need to convince the very people that are the ones that are the most antagonistic to what you want to do. And if you think about it, and when I look at it, and you asked me before about what you learn as a lawyer, sometimes you learn that there are battles you're never going to win, and just accept it. So for instance, I've met people that I know that no matter what it is that I'm going to bring them, it's not going to succeed. So I'll stop bringing them things. I've got better things to do with my time, right?
It's fair.
But if you go about it in the right way, then you can find the right people, the ones that will be open to listening to what you're doing and bring in innovation. So one is finding the right stakeholders and the NIH, not invented here syndrome. Let's say you got over that. Then your next step is that you need to convince the organization that it's a low enough risk to engage with that entity. Now, if I develop something internally, it's developed on my systems, it's got all my rules and regulations that are already built into it, it's much easier, right? But if I now bring a startup from the outside, can we trust them? Are they compliant? Have they done everything the way we want to? And so you go through a significant ordeal to just convince people to go through with that process. And the third one, which is a little weird because it's just not rational, but it is very real, is the financing. If I now take 5 people to develop something internally, it's free. But if I pay a company $200,000, I'm paying them $200,000 that are going out of my pocket right now. Now, it's of course a fallacy because my 5 people probably cost me $1 million versus the 200K that I'm paying for a software. And if my 5 people have now developed this, over the next few years, someone's going to have to maintain this and improve it and advance it. Versus my startup that I'm paying them every year, but they have 50 people in the startup that are working specifically on this thing and are going to make sure that it's always cutting edge. So when we talk costs, obviously the external one is much cheaper, but it feels like it's out of pocket money versus the other one that doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
So I think that too is a psychological barrier that one needs to overcome. And my last reason, and probably the hardest one, is that to get something done in a large corporation, and maybe I'll say it in reverse. When I joined Citi and someone said, oh, big title, can you decide on your own on each investment at Citi? And I said, yes, all on my own with 17 other people.
That's nice.
And it's true, right? You cannot get anything done on your own in a large corporation. You need an army of other people that you get to go along with you, to be convinced about what you're doing, to approve it. And in order to do all of that, I call it herding cats. Everyone's really smart. Everyone's really independent. Everyone really has their own thought process, their priorities, their raison d'etre. And you need to convince all of them at the same time to move in one direction. It's pretty hard. Let's be real.
Yeah. Now that leads to a corporate VC. So we talked about external innovation. You talked about cost and how the fallacy between the two types of cost. But corporate VC is no longer about cost. It's about investment. So can you tell why we should have corporations thinking about corporate VCs as a very effective way of sourcing external innovation and even assessing them?
So that's a great question. So we have 2 VCs in Citi, and they have slightly different attitudes. But the bottom line, I think, is that they do something very similar in the end, right? They look at companies in a specific space, they map it out, they evaluate it, they compare the companies in the different areas. One of them waits till there's a line of sight to an engagement. The other engages prior to the line of sight. But those are the details, because the work prior to that is where you analyze and evaluate, and in VC world, we call it due diligence. But the reality of it is that it's really doing all the legwork of the external innovation, if you will, of understanding thoroughly what challenge the startup is tackling, how well they tackle it, who else is tackling it in different manners, and are those manners better or not, and how big the opportunity is. Now, on the CVC scale, and you know this as well as I do, in some cases, companies will go, well, if it's a huge bonanza for me as a company, I don't care if it's a big exit or not. And some will say, no, when I look at an investment, I want it to be a great financial return in addition to a strategic fit. And I think, they're both legitimate manners of looking at an investment, right? But the outcome is somewhat different. So for us, we're a financial institution. Obviously, we look at financial outcomes. We don't know how to not do that. So you can imagine where we fall on that scale. But I think it's a great way of ensuring that you have something that is both strategic and a good company that has a good success potential. Because in a sense, if it's a really good company, it shouldn't be selling just to a Citi or just to TDK or whatever, right? It should be able to sell to the likes of us as well. And so if it does sell to the likes of us, it should be doing well financially as well. And I think it's a very good filter to ensuring that you're looking at the best companies in the space and not just, investing in something that's plugs a hole in your systems right now.
Well, one way to look at it is if it's exceptional financial return, it's a very meaningful project that solves meaningful problems.
Yeah, look, when you're a big company, I think if it's just really good financial returns, it would have to be really big for it to be, to move the needle for a large corporation. And so if it doesn't resolve anything for you internally, then you've missed out on something, right? I mean, it's not it's much better to have really good returns if you've missed the mark on the strategic, because if you've missed the mark on both strategic and financial, now that's a bad investment.
Yep.
But I think if it's just good financial returns and there have been no learnings, that it doesn't have to be commercialized, right? Just learning from what you've done and being able to say, oh, we now understand X better, that's fine too. But you need to get some learning out of it, I think, to justify why we've spent our money on this rather than our core business or a really strategic investment.
So I would like to double click on this, both from the what are we learning and how do you visualize the learning, and also the value add you bring to the entrepreneurs. So let's start with the learnings. How do you maybe capture it is the easy way in a way, but how do you visualize and share it inside the organization?
So that's a really good question, and it's hard, right? It's very difficult. In particular, the larger the organization, the harder it is. Citi is in well over 200,000 people, so you can't go talking to people and making sure that they hear the message. You've got to really get to the right stakeholders and convey it and present the company and talk about it. And we've got newsletters, we've got an internal Collaborate site, which love them, hate them, but it's like the corporate Facebook. We spend a lot of time communicating, talking to the stakeholders and presenting companies all the time, because otherwise you've just invested for financial returns. It's back to the same proposition. If you're not spending your time bringing it into the organization, then the value is limited. The other thing that we've done is we have what we call catalysts. So these are people from the businesses that sit with Citi Ventures and learn about our different portfolio companies and actually spend time trying to commercialize the portfolio all the time. And we have, I want to say, about as many catalysts as we have investors. So we really put our money where our mouths are in terms of not just investing for investment, but working to help our companies and presenting them to the business and pushing them through. But in addition to that, we're the bank of banks, we're the bank of large insurance companies, we're the bank of large enterprise retailers. So a lot of our startups, their dream customers, we know how to reach them, right? So some of what we do is also present them. So in any given year, maybe, with the exception of COVID, that's kind of trumped the cards there, but we meet a ton of Citi clients and we'll do warm introductions. If your client will come and will say, hey, I'm really interested in whatever it is, products in area X, then we might say, hey, in our portfolio, we have these 3 companies. Would you like to meet them? And we'll do introductions or facilitate meetings and enable them to meet them. This is great for the clients, but it's really, really great for the startups because they're potential clients for them. So we've really managed to create a system that pushes the companies into Citi and ensures that they get a lot of visibility inside Citi, but also leverages our connections and our capabilities to ensure that we're constantly helping the company in the best manner possible. And if you remember what I was saying in my team, well, I've got a team of people whose sole job it is to find the right stakeholders within the organization for companies. So they're really working at doing this full time.
And that was my next question. So the team, and how do they track? So I understand they do all these nice introductions, but do they then track how much of that becomes a real business for your startups, a real opportunity inside Citi?
So that's a great question, and I'll divide it into 2. So first of all, yes, we count the number of companies we've met, the number of companies that we've then thought. So you've got to first pass our test, right? That we think that you're interesting and engaging, and we want to push you forward. So that's a fraction of the ones that we've met. Yep. And then of those that we've tried to push forward, we don't have 100% success rate in finding a stakeholder who also falls in love with the company. So we measure how many of them we've managed to get to a second or third meeting, that there's significant engagement from the business and that they're keen on developing a further relationship with the startup or exploring it further. And we then track how many of them we've managed to convert into a POC. And we then track how many of them there's an agreement to do a commercialization. And then we work our hours on doing the onboarding constantly as well, because if we don't, then someone said they wanted to commercialize and nothing happens, right? Because it's long and cumbersome. So we really work the whole thing, and we've got the whole funnel measured, and we celebrate every win. Don't misunderstand, because if you just measure the commercializations, we'll be sad many, many days a year. So we celebrate the little wins on the way, but we're absolutely honest with ourselves that all those little wins that we're celebrating, they're not the end goal. The end goal is, a real commercial deal. When it comes to the introductions that we make, so we typically once a quarter will reach out to the startup and say, how did it progress? Where are you at with this company? Is there something we can do to help? And sometimes they'll tell us, and sometimes they won't, but more often than not, we will get an input and they'll say, wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much. They just signed a deal, or they invested in us, and so on and so forth. So we don't have 100% visibility into what's happening, but we do get some decent coverage of the successes. And we've also improved it. So if in the beginning, an insurance company would come visit and we'd say, oh, let's throw all our insurtechs at them. We've learned to do this a lot better with time, and to actually ask the people that are coming what their specific interests is. So we'll do pre-calls to understand what they're looking for, and then find the companies we think will be most interesting, send it to them for approval prior to the visit, and then really ensure that there's follow-up from the visits. And so the hit rate improves when you do the work. It's a lot of work, right? But the hit rate really does improve.
Respect to your best practice you mentioned at the beginning, which is don't push, listen, and then you can find the fit.
Exactly.
And so this pipeline, of course, becomes also quantifiable. So does that become part of your team's KPIs, or is that something you don't make as KPIs?
So it's absolutely KPIs, and some people like it more, some people like it less, but for sure it's KPIs. It's not that if I tell you, listen, I want you to find a startup in ESG this year, and I want you to do something with them, and you bring 30 startups and nothing ensues, right? Nobody bites. It's not a KPI that I will hang you from the tallest branch because there was no POC. I will reward you for having brought the 30, 40, 50 companies that you looked at, and we'll continue looking for the right one for the engagement. So yes, it's absolutely part of the KPIs, but it's not, hard KPIs, all of them, some more, some less, but it's not all hard KPIs. It's, it's the end all and be all if you missed one.
Now, do you have what I like to call true north KPI, something that your team is looking at achieving?
So it's maybe not what I would call a KPI. We have our holy grail, right? So
okay. That sounds even better.
Here's how I look at it. If you hold my feet to the fire, I will fulfill I have this intrinsic need to get brownie points, to be a good girl and get the best grade possible, right? That's my nature. So if you put a very stringent KPI on me, I will abide by that KPI. So let's say you tell me you need to have 10 POCs this year. You will get 10 POCs, but I will go for the lowest hanging fruit to achieve that, because my goal will be 10 POCs. It won't be to bring the best companies into Citi. So I will always try and make sure that we don't put that type of KPIs on people, because I don't want to have a run for the lowest common denominator. I want
quality over quantity.
Exactly. So for me, the holy grail is not a Me Too company that we managed to onboard in a record time at Citi, yay, but rather something that will create a new business opportunity for Citi, or something that will replace another system that we have and save millions and millions of dollars, or something that will be really impactful for the organization, rather than a little feature that we will use and we'll be happy and it's all great and congratulations, and we'll celebrate it. As I said, I will be happy to celebrate every celebration with anyone, but the real big celebrations are the ones that are very, very impactful for your organization and make a difference, and ensure that in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years, we're not a memory of what used to be a large company, if you think about it.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about team. So let's talk about recruitment. How do you recruit team members to join a corporate VC? What are you watching out for? what do you care most about?
So for me, and that's me more than anyone else, I think it's not necessarily a rule for everyone else, but I really want to work with these people. I want to like them. I want to feel that they're nice. I want to know that there's no I in team, that we'll get along, we'll have each other's backs, we'll work together in a great way. So that's like a super important criteria. I see them for more hours than I'm going to see my husband, my children. I want to enjoy the time I spend with them. So that's one. The other thing is, so in a VC, one of the most important things is quantitative capabilities, but at the same time, you want someone that has a high EQ and someone that understands people and understands who's on the other side, what makes them tick, how it works, etc. And so I'm always trying to find someone who'll be very capable on both fronts, or alternatively, when you're creating a team, it's also acceptable to have some that are strong in one thing and others that are strong in the other, but that limits them, in terms of how good they are as investors. So optimally, you really do want someone that has quantitative and qualitative superpowers concurrently.
Do you have questions to assess whether you will enjoy working with them and whether they have the skill set you just mentioned?
So on the skill set, there's not really, because we don't necessarily get you get to hear what they've done before, and if they spend 2 years as investment bankers and they have the quantitative skills, I'm not really worried. It's easy to resolve. On the qualitative, it's much more subtle than that. So I think part of it is just chit-chatting, the way you and I are now, and understanding and getting to learn how the other person ticks, what makes them tick, what they're thinking. I also really like hearing what questions they're going to ask me.
Yep.
And learning from that, how they approach this and what they're thinking. I've had some very odd interviews at the end of which I've gone, maybe not. I don't think I would enjoy being with that person for more than the 1 hour I've just spent with them. But overwhelmingly, people try to be nice in an interview. So it's not about the superficial response, but rather digging into it a little more and trying to find out what you think about the person and where you think they're going to excel or not. And, how arrogant are they? How much do they listen, and how much do they tell you as opposed to ask you? And trying to really evaluate from that what you think about the person you're interviewing.
And I agree, the questions they ask says so much. Now, you've assembled this team. How do you make sure this team performs with so many stakeholders? You have the entrepreneurs, you have the mothership, you have other investing partners. How do you manage?
So, look, I don't think there's one size fits all, right? You need to find, and as manager, it's the same thing. You need to understand what makes each one of your people tick and be able to guide them in a meaningful way. And there's people that are that love the stick and others that love the carrot. But I think it's not about what the manager loves. It's rather about what will make the employee do what they need. And some need a word of encouragement, and some need to be told, you missed your deadline here, and make sure it doesn't happen again, or some strict, or even just tell them, you need to ensure you hit X number per month of whatever meetings with companies or etc. I always like to recruit people that are, someone told me nicely, horses that gallop that you have to slow down versus horses that you need to whip into running. So it's much easier, because if you have people that are running and you just have to hold them back from time to time and guide them and steer them in the right direction, then your life is much easier. As long as you've remembered to recruit this type of people that are also team players, and that's the challenge.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Citi having 2 corporate VCs. Not so many companies have 2 corporate VCs. So Can you share maybe why and how it's structured and how it's co-opt or collaborate?
Yeah, so I think it comes from originally from different businesses. So the capital markets business is a very unique type of businesses, and consequently, the people that invest in it are people that understand that type of business, right? Of technology needs, of a deep understanding of the language of the traders, etc. And so they have their own, or started out having their own VC fund. And Citi Ventures concurrently was doing the investments for the rest of the organization. Now, with time, I think around the capital markets, there's a few more businesses that were added to it, and so now you basically have one investment entity that is investing around the institutional corporate group entities within Citi, and another that's doing the investments in the rest of the organization. And I'd say that it's overwhelmingly, pretty collaborative. First of all, because there's, it's quite well split up, and it's relatively easy to ensure that where what goes where.
Yeah.
Investors are typically of one or the other. So I'm in this, I think, pretty unique position in Citi where I invest for both entities, but I think pretty much everyone else is working for either one or the other, and so they know what their parameters are, what their guardrails are, etc. And if it's not within that, then you can take it to the other entity and enable them to invest. And they're looking at things in a somewhat different way. So where the business is investing, they're looking at it from the business's interests, and overwhelmingly it will be things that there's line of sight to an engagement, or you understand very, very clearly already why a certain space is strategic for you. Whereas on the other side, you might say this is an area that is going to be strategic. It might be 3 years out. That's okay. We're investing because that's the future of the bank. That's where we need to be headed, but we're not ready to engage with it on the business side yet. And that's fine. We'll build it up and we'll grow with the company to get to that area.
So let me stress test this a little bit, knowing that you can invest.
It's in a difficult position now. Go ahead.
No. It's actually probably a nice one for entrepreneurs. If you can invest for both, is there sometimes a case where you could decide to have one investment from both CVCs, and then you are two lines on the cap table?
So yes, we do have certain examples where it's been strategic for both sides, and we've done investments, two-hatted investments, right? 2 lines on the cap table.
Wow.
And we do it in a very collaborative manner, and usually you'll have. So we try and not be burdensome to the entrepreneurs. So usually one of the 2 groups will take the lead, and the other will be the co-investor, and we might still need to get approvals internally for ourselves, but we won't put the entrepreneur through the ordeal of having to run through it twice.
That's really nice, because then you get double Citi goodness from 2 different CVCs, different reach. That's a superpower in itself.
It's not bad, and I think it also gives you, the highest advantages of each one of them. So one of them is, super connected to one part of the business, and the other is super connected to another. And so when you get both of them, you're really getting double love.
Now let's add to the complexity. So you work with these 2 CVCs, but also with the Innovation Lab. Tell me more about the Innovation Lab, why it was created, and the mission.
Sure. So the Innovation Labs started out as an internal technology group that was going to develop solutions for Citi. And when it was set up, I think the idea was, it's not, I have a specific software that needs to be developed, and we know exactly what needs to be done, and we just put developers to go to work at it. Instead, the idea was to come to people and say, I have a problem. I don't know how to resolve it. Can you guys try and figure out what we could even do with this? And we did it, and we experimented in a number of different ways. I like to tell the story of, so the lab in Tel Aviv, when it was opened, we took some really, really smart data scientists, gave them access to Citi data. They were all Citi employees. And we told them, get to work, start thinking of solutions. Now, these guys were really, really smart people, but not necessarily with understanding or knowledge about financial services. And the data, well, it was, we have a lot of data, right? It was good data. And what we found out that 6 months into it, they had come up with a fair number of stuff that was, complete duds. Okay, so you thought of this idea, but who cares, right? Why do we need it? The other part was, so you thought of this idea, you've managed to make it work, but by the way, if you knew financial services, you'd know that by doing just A plus B, you could get to the same results without all this hard work. Again, not what we want, not great. And then, on the one-off, they'd come up with a really good idea, but it was really coincidental and statistically minor compared to all the other stuff. So our conclusion was that we needed to do work in a different manner, and we brought in the business to work hand in hand with the technologists, still technologists who don't know necessarily financial services, still with an understanding that we don't want them to be too aware of what the box is. We want them to think outside of it, but yes, with some guidance from the business so that they're not working in a complete vacuum or chaotic state. And the results have been fantastic, right? We've come to a lot of really, really good results, and we've refined it and fine-tuned it. And today we have labs in London, New York, Tel Aviv, Dublin, Singapore. I'm missing someone? No, I think that's it. It's five labs around the world doing work for different places in the organization. And we're very focused on being like the innovation part, right? So not an R&D lab, an entity that's looking at many different things that are really, really front-running everything that's happening in terms of technology in the world. At the same time, in 2013, I was brought in and I was told, listen, this is all great, but we also want to do something with startups. And can you create some program for us to engage with the startups? And I'll admit that at the time they said it's going to be in fintech. And I ran to Dr. Google and I said, help me out. What is fintech? And Google didn't know. And that's pretty crazy, right? I found maybe 2-3 pages that mentioned fintech and 2-3 lines within those pages that were fintech and Israel. It was really minor. And, I took a deep breath and I said, well, if Google doesn't know what it is, I can go to the interview and feel very comfortable. Nobody knows what it is. And I had the weirdest job interview at the time because my boss, future boss, and I were having this conversation where he didn't understand a word I was saying. I had no clue what he was telling me. But in the end, I think we both came to a conclusion that each one of us really understands what we're talking about. And so if we trust the other, we'll be fine. And sure enough, I started working with the organization. And today we have the external innovation team that I told you about before. And so it's working very nicely together because we get requests from the business. Sometimes the right way to do it is to build. Sometimes the right way to do it is the buy. And sometimes we're looking at a solution that you need to get the mixture of the two, a combination that takes some capability from the outside and builds a Citi unique flavor to it on the inside and ensures that we have a strong solution that will be optimized for our clients.
Very nice. Very nice. So we are getting to the top of the hour. So let me ask a final question. And here it's more for the entrepreneurs who are watching us. What are you interested to invest next?
That's a great question. So I've got this crazy idea that we have to break down everything to do with AI and privacy into small chunks and build it up in a manner that will enable us to work in a better manner. So I started out by doing a bake-off between synthetic data companies, and we invested in the winner of our bake-off. Mostly AI is an Austrian company, and it's something that we're really excited about because we don't think you can work with third parties. How do you evaluate startups if you don't have Citi-like data that you can test through them, but which is not Citi's actual data because we won't get approval to share that. So that was one step. Then the next step, we did an evaluation on explainability of AI because I'm a firm believer in ethics and AI, but how can you be ethical if you don't understand how you got to the decision that you got to?
Yep.
This explainability. So within all of that, I'm looking at all the next little steps within it, all the different ways of collaboration, how we can improve the work that we do with the startups and engage with them in a better way. And And you can understand that there's other tool sets, right? Like privacy enhancing technologies beyond synthetic data, like ethics solutions that will do the next level up above the explainability. There's startups around areas that ensure that, so you've explained it, but is it still doing what you did? So, all the observability and compliance aspects, all the ML ops around all of this, so there's a lot of areas around all of this AI space that I think are super, super exciting. But I've geeked out on this. The reality is that, I'm thrilled with startups that are doing anything that's strategic for Citi, and always happy to meet companies that, and strategic for Citi is fintech, but it's also enterprise IT and HR tech and marketing tech and prop tech and you name it, right? Anything that a large financial institution or a large corporate could be interested in engaging with. And I would invite entrepreneurs to reach out, and we'd be delighted to meet them.
And like you mentioned, even Citi's own customers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ornit, thank you so much for your time and sharing so much about your journey and everything you've learned along the way.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicolas.
Merci, merci.
Merci.